To create a behavior intervention plan, you first need to go to the future IEP, and then you will find the page for the behavior intervention plan listed among all the other pages right beneath assessment plan. Once you open it, you're going to see this. And the only part that's missing on this page is the student information, which would be showing on the top. But of course, I hid that to keep it confidential. But we're going to go through the questions of the behavior intervention plan and see how we can answer them properly. The first question asks about the behavior impeding learning, and in between parentheses it says describe what it looks like. And this is very critical because we cannot be identifying the behavior in a judgmental way or in a subjective way. We cannot say something like he's just off the chain, or he's very hyper. This is not a behavior. Being hyper is not a behavior, so we have to be specific. So if we look here at the manual and the section that has to do with the first question, it would give a lot of emphasis on how the behavior needs to be observable. So whatever you write on paper should be what the behavior would look like on camera. If you can't see it with your eyes, then you cannot identify it as the behavior. Sometimes when we identify the behavior as a team, it's more of a category, like being off task. And that's fine, but we have to write a description of what off task is. How is the student off task? Is he off task by just sitting down and doing nothing? Is he off task by crawling on the floor? Is he off task by playing with something? Because this will make a huge difference when we try to decide on the ways to support the student. If he's playing with certain things is different from if he's just sitting down and doing nothing. The cause or the purpose for this behavior will differ greatly. And unless we are being very accurate, we will not be able to come up with effective strategies to support the behavior. Another example is poor organization and planning. How is the student having poor organization and planning? This can be in so many different ways. So in this case, for example, we can say he rushes through the assignments, he doesn't take his time to read the questions, or maybe he loses his assignments, he loses papers, he doesn't take notes in class. The organization and planning can be manifested in so many ways, and that's why we have to be specific by writing the description of what it looks like. Here's another example that's very common: disrupts other students' learning. How does the student disrupt? We can't just say disrupt and stop there, because we can't help the student if we don't know what it looks like. Tapping the neighbor's shoulder, grabbing their materials, being argumentative, or having arguments with his peers or her peers. So we just have to be very specific. And this is one of the major things, because unless we are able to identify the behavior clearly, we will not be able to do the rest of the plan effectively. The second question in the behavior intervention plan is how the behavior impedes the learning. The behavior impedes the learning normally because it gets in the way of the student's achievement or of the achievement of the rest of the students in the classroom. And it could be impacting them academically or socially, or sometimes the behavior can even be a safety concern, or a safety, it causes a threat to the students in the classroom. So some of the ways that the behavior could be getting in the way of learning is when the student is unavailable for instruction. Let's say a student elopes. That means he or she is not available to engage in the instruction of the classroom. Normally, a lot of the behaviors also would cause reduced skills or reduced learning skills in the classroom, reduced productivity. If they're not engaged or if they're off task, these are going to be likely results. Lack of work production, and we already covered that. There's also this disruption for other students. Sometimes the student himself or herself can be learning, but they're impeding someone else from learning. That's also a concern. Um, and sometimes the student's behavior requires that the class activities would stop. Let's say the student is threatening to throw something or is throwing something, and the teacher evacuates the classroom. Then this means that this is stopping the class from proceeding. A lot of the time, also, instructional time could be wasted simply for disciplinary proceedings. If the teacher has to stop teaching to address the behavior, especially if it's frequent, then it is a concern. Or requiring full adult attention. The student is just consistently seeking attention from the teacher, and that's why they're showing the behaviors they are. Sometimes the behavior can simply be impacting the peers interaction, the peer interactions, or the environment in the classroom. Um, Even though in certain cases the student may not be directly hurting other kids, the students may simply be just afraid or hyper vigilant. They're always on their toes, expecting something negative to happen. So all these can be ways in which the behavior would be impeding the learning in the classroom. The third question is about the need for a behavior intervention plan. Is the need in the early stage intervention, moderate stage, serious stage, or extreme stage? There's actually specific criteria for each of these stages, so let's take a look at them. The early stage intervention here's the general principle for this stage. In this case, the behavior is not yet specifically impacting learning of the student or classroom functioning. So this is an early stage, but there is an anticipation that the behavior could escalate if it's not addressed. And that's why a behavior intervention plan is needed. In this case also, the teachers have to keep in mind that this is assuming that the general classroom management techniques are not enough. Because if there is a lack in the general classroom management techniques, then this needs to happen first before a behavior intervention plan is developed. But assuming that the general techniques are not working and there is a possibility that the behavior would escalate, then a behavior intervention plan could be developed. The two examples for an early stage phase would be a behavior that is not generalized to more than one situation. So a behavior that only happens in a specific situation, or if the behavior just started to show recently, so it didn't happen more than 3 to 4 times, but the team feels that there is a possibility for the behavior to escalate. Let's look at the moderate phase. The general principle here would be behavior is beginning to significantly impact classroom functioning or student learning. That's the moderate phase, when it actually starts to impact the learning in the classroom. And examples of these behaviors would be a behavior that has generalized in multiple settings. So instead of the student acting out during math only, now it's during math and reading and, or math and language arts. The behavior has repeatedly occurred, so it's happening daily or on a weekly basis, and it's being more regular. Behaviors are disrupting the classroom functioning, and the students are unable to do the work that they're supposed to do because the teacher has to stop teaching and address the behavior. And another example would be the student himself or herself is not making enough progress toward the standards or towards the IEP goals. So this would be a moderate stage of the behavior. An early stage would be if it's not generalized yet, but there is a concern that it may escalate. The third behavior stage is the serious stage, and that's when the team would need to have systematic observations and data collection. There might even be a need for one of the staff members to be trained specifically for interfering with the behavior. One of the behaviors that would be considered serious is assaults, physical assaults to a staff member or another peer. Another example would be if the student is inflicting harm on him or herself, maybe banging their heads against the wall or skin picking or anything of that sort. The team should also consider a referral for a mental health assessment at that point. Some other examples would be if the behavior is interfering with the quality of life, excuse me, for the student. So maybe the student is throwing her or her own clothes in the bus, or they are having school phobia, or refusing to attend school. So all these would be considered at the serious stage. The last stage is the extreme designation, and this is usually when the kind of hurt that the student is causing himself or others is very serious. So it could be that the student is threatening to kill himself or kill someone else, or it could be that the student is hitting himself hard enough to cut his or her own skin or cause bruises or even damage organs. So at that point, this is considered extreme. And if the student hasn't been referred already, he or she should be referred for a mental health assessment. Question number 4 addresses the frequency, intensity, or duration of the behavior. When you answer this question, you may address only one of the 3 elements, or you may address all 3 of them. It is up to you and up to the team to see what would be the best way to describe the behavior. Sometimes it's enough to just describe the frequency. Sometimes it might be beneficial to describe the frequency and the intensity and the duration, or maybe 2 out of the 3. So just use your discretion when you answer this question. The purpose of this question is to describe the extent to which this behavior is significant. In order for you to answer this question, you will need some data collection. And the data collection doesn't always have to be concrete. It doesn't have to be formal. But the more severe the behavior is, the more formal the documentation needs to be, and the data collection needs to be reliable. But some ways you can collect data is just using general teacher impressions on the frequency, intensity, or duration. Sometimes you can also review the student records. So, for example, the student file may include information about how many times the student has been referred to the office for disciplinary reasons, or how many times the student has been suspended, or how many times the school had to call home in regards to a behavior. So this can be useful for this purpose as well. You can conduct interviews with staff members or people who work so closely with the students and who observed the behavior on more than one occasion. You can also use objective data sheets. So you can create a sheet or find a data sheet that suits the type of behavior that you're describing, and use it for a reasonable period of time to collect the information about the frequency, intensity, or duration. You can do observations, direct observations of the student, and just write your notes. And in some cases, a more systematic way of collecting information, and you might even, the team might even recommend external observers to come and take notes about the behaviors. This is usually when the behavior is serious or extreme. So these are some ways of how you can collect information. Once you have this information, you can start describing each of the elements. The frequency really depends on the type of behavior and on the student. Some behaviors may be happening frequently. Let's say a student is off task and he's off task every few minutes, or maybe every 15 minutes or every hour. Um, so that would be very frequent. Other cases, let's say the student is being aggressive towards others. This may be happening certain times a week. Certain behaviors may be happening periodically. On certain days, or every Monday, or every time the student comes back from a long break. So this would be beneficial to document. Some things happen over time. So let's say, once, sometimes they don't necessarily happen so frequently, but they're very necessary to address. So certain behaviors, like a student threatening to kill himself or hurt others, even if it happens once a year, it may still need to be addressed in a behavior intervention plan, or it could be happening 6 times over the year, but it's serious enough to be addressed in a behavior intervention plan. Um, Another way to describe the behavior is by describing the intensity. So you want to discuss how the depth, the force, the strength, or the vigor of or extreme level of the behavior. So for example, if you're going to say that the student screams, how loud does the student screams? Is it just heard by his peers in the same class, or is it loud enough to be heard in adjacent classrooms? If he hits, how hard does he hit? Is it just a gentle kind hit, or is it it's restracted fist and it's hard enough to bruise someone? If the student bites, is it hard enough to leave a mark, or is he just acting like he's going to bite? So again, sometimes in certain cases, and again, it's depending on the behavior and on the student, describing the intensity may be necessary. The duration for which the behavior lasts is also very important in some cases. How long does the behavior last? Let's say the student gets off the seat. How long does he stay off the seat, or she stays off the seat? Let's say the student cries or screams. How long does it last? For 20 minutes continuously, or is it just every few minutes? So this is very critical information, and again, the more vividly you describe the behavior, the better it is to be able to help the student improve, because you will be able to measure progress accurately.